Great, great. Thank you, choir. Y'all killed it. Well, I shouldn't say that in church probably, but you know, wonderful. Thank you. Today, this is homecoming, and we celebrate this around this time of year because this church was started 35 years ago in this month. And we do this so that people will have another reason to celebrate. Really is the big thing. So I'm glad you're here, and you know we'll have a potluck afterwards. We've had attention toward this for some time. And it seemed to me the topic that we should do while we're here is this idea of making this place a sacred space. And many of you have said this when you first came to this church, that you came in the door and you felt like something was different. And because of that, you began to relax something inside, and before long you knew you were crying, but you didn't know why, and it wasn't about anything in particular, other than the speaker could have been better. And this atmospheric condition that has been built up here, because people have come here to pray, to meditate, but also to love and to accept. And there's a certain beauty in coming to a place where you feel accepted, and there's something about the vibration that says yay, yay, to just who you are as a person. And not every church has it, and not every church can keep it for that long, and this place has been holding it for quite some time. I was in France a few years ago and went to a fairly old, very old church that maybe at one time it had it, but I walked into the building and it was completely void of any sense of spirituality or anything that would warm your heart. It was as cold as stone. And that, I hope, is the opposite of what we do when you come in here. You come in here and people greet you at the door and they say hello. And then maybe they see you meet somebody to say something along the way, and eventually you sit down. But in those moments, we are also setting the conditions when we greet each other like friends, where we go to the people that we don't know and we say hello and say, I don't know about you, but I don't think I've ever met you before, have I? Which is what I have to do. And when they say, oh, hey, yeah, I met you 5 times before. But they're forgiving. And this whole thing about welcoming someone in is one of those early layers of making a place sacred. That you know that, at least on a polite level, on a level of neighborliness, we are ready to accept you and bring you in. But there are other layers as well. I was having an interesting conversation with somebody a few days ago, and I was talking about how I perceive the nature of the world. And one of the ways that I see it is that it's layered. It's layered in our perception of it anyway. So on the first layer, on the level that most people try to move through the world with, there's on this layer there are individuals, and everybody is separate, and everybody has a separate story. They have a history, they have desires, and all those desires, histories, and particularities about their looks and their past make them individuals. And on that level of the individual, we're all separate. We may share some experiences, but basically we're all separate. And everybody says of those individuals, you're unique. There's only one of you, as Mr. Rogers would say. That's one layer. Underneath that layer is a layer of oneness, in which there is, on a spiritual level or on a non-physical level, there is a unification of all of us. And we are all essentially outcroppings of one consciousness, different minds, sort of, but all of the one mind. Different spirits, sort of, but all of the one spirit. And we are at this level. When we are at this level, then those phrases, there's only one presence and one power, is only one layer beneath that, in which we actually realize that it's not just the human at that level, but the whole of it is at one presence, one power, and there is one presence, one power, one divinity, one spirit that is manifesting as the human level, even at the completely individual level. It's manifesting up into these different fingers on the hand of God. And we can recognize ourselves at each of these levels. On the surface level, we're polite, we're nice, we're kind, we're accepting. On the next level, we actually see the Christ in the other person. And when we see the Christ in the other person, we're recognizing that that one presence, that the beauty, that wholeness, that perfect idea of humanity is present in them, even though on this level there are so many things that don't look like they are the way it would be if you were God. But at this level, you begin to see, so they are that one presence. How about that? That's really what I'm looking at. And it is a shift in perception, and it is a shift that you can consciously take, where you just go, I'm going to see the very best in them, the highest, and I'm going to imagine, as one of my friends said, the face of Jesus on each and every person. That level of perception makes that a holy relationship, because you're lifting them. Just by looking at them that way, you're giving them permission to step into that level of being if they have never even heard of it. You're inviting them to know themselves as the Christed being that they are. Christed being not meaning they are Jesus the Christ, but rather a Christ. And everyone has that in them, in the potential, in the maybe not yet made manifest, but in the potential. Or as one person said, if one person can do it, it is doable. We can do it. And it is a level of potential that not many meet, but it is there. And if we're operating at that level, we are giving permission for them to be holy, to be good, to be wise, to not succumb to anger or fear, but to see the world in a whole other way so that they could actually move through the world as loving beings. That's the permission we're giving them when we see them that way. And when we give it away, we gain it ourselves. And so it is a great invitation, anytime you can think of it, to see the person in front of you as the Christ, or as the divine as human. Now there's the next layer. And at this deeper layer, this is when we begin to look at the whole world in that way. And it is what some of the saints have been able to do, is to begin to perceive the world that all is well, just as it is, whether we can, at this level, recognize it or not. If it hurts at this level, it can still be okay at this level. Because here we are seeing as though the whole of it was one divine being playing out the many roles. One presence that is emanating through all of creation. I've been watching on PBS the science shows. The latest one I saw was the snowball Earth. Have you all heard of it? You know, there was a period in which the whole Earth was covered in ice and snow. With very, very few exceptions, it was just one big white planet. Now, if you think about it, from our point of view, our personal point of view, that would be terrible. right? And for most animals and plants, it was terrible. But it was part of the process. It has evolved. It's been part of the unfolding that has brought us to where we are today. And prior to that, there was a period in which it was all volcanoes. And after that, and who knows what the whole of the game is. As God would say to Job, I have higher points of view than you do. And when we're at the deepest level, there's a certain understanding that maybe even the strife that we see in the world today is part of the process, part of that freezing over of people's hearts that is the prelude to some new life. We don't know. But there's a deeper sense of acceptance and peace that comes when we get to that level. It's so. And we can let it be as it is. Now there's several things I think we can do as a group to help bring out that awareness, or the level of the Christ awareness, or at least politeness as people come here. And one of those things is something we teach to the Sacred Prayer Team. Now, the Sacred Prayer Team is a group who gets the first name of people who put their prayers in the prayer box, but nothing else. No details, no facts, no thing to get our minds hooked on, just simply a name. And the golden key is the practice that we invite people to do there. And the golden key goes like this. First, read the name. Then, forget about it. Think only of the divine. Think only your highest and most beautiful thoughts. Raise your consciousness to a level at which you begin to vibrate higher. And you are lifting them up, just as it says in the Bible. Jesus says, near the time he's going to the cross, if I be lifted up, I draw all people with me. If my consciousness raises, I'm raising those in my consciousness with me. And so those names that were read with nothing connected to them, they are brought along and raised up. And so that practice of reading the name and then raising your vibration, that is the golden key. That's what we ask the Sacred Prayer Team to do, and they do it on a weekly basis. They take your names, they read you, and they bring you up. I was reading about a story about Mark Victor Hansen, who wrote Chicken Soup, or compiled Chicken Soup for the Soul. And because he had done that, he became quite famous and was invited to a Unity church in Denver. It had a lot of people attending, and he was going to do 3 services, and then he was going to do a workshop in the afternoon. And while he's at one of those services, a man comes up to him and says, you know, you've heard of Make-A-Wish? He says, yeah, sure I have. He says, well, there's a young woman here who's 17 who wanted, before she died, to attend your workshop. And he meets her. She has the turban on her head because she's lost all her hair due to chemotherapy. And they talk for a few minutes. And then during Mark's workshop, he says, would y'all like to learn a healing technique? And 1,000 people raise their hand and say, yes, we want to learn this. He says, well, rub your hands together like this. And they rub their hands together. And he says, now feel the energy between them. So, okay, now let's pair up and we'll do it. So they did energy for him. Then he brings the girl up. And he goes, she's could use some healing. Would you like to help her? And 1,000 people raise their hands, rub them together, and send energy to her. 2 months later, she's well. 2 years later, she's graduated. 2 more years, she's married. to think that your consciousness and your intentions are only there for you, only affect your life, seems rather absurd at the level of the Christ. And so what we do, think, and say, how we feel, how we project on others our own thoughts about them, it has an effect. And we as human beings can deny it. And at the level of the individual, it's probably true. It doesn't have as much effect as we would like. Often we want to have more power over them, but we can't. But at this level, what's true for us is true. It sends its word out, and it is making a ripple through the fabric of humanity. And how we think and feel and what we hold for others is a blessing or a curse. If you think about what we did last week, when we did Ho'oponopono, and we did the I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you statements, what we were doing was moving at the level of the Christ. And as we forgive and release, which means to release what is inside of us, the condemning, the anger, the violence, etc. As we forgive and let that go, we make space for the world to do the same. And it is a very powerful prayer. It has potency. It is not just something for us, but it is something for others as well. And making sacred space is recognizing that as you vibrate, you invite your neighbor to vibrate also. And so when you come into a place like this, whether you know it or not, there are already people here who have said, I will vibrate at a higher level when I'm in the sanctuary. And you may not know who they are. You know, I think it's out of the Jewish tradition, there are 10 people in the world that are holding the world together. And if we didn't have those 10 people, the whole place would blow up. It's sort of like that here. There's actually more than 10. And they're holding space. And I invite you to take that as your goal, to come into here, and if you're carrying a lot of stuff you don't want, drop it at the door. And bring your best for at least an hour, and see if you want to pick it up on the way out. I was talking to a minister friend of mine yesterday, and we were talking about how to shift consciousness, essentially. And he said, you know, I've asked several people this. He says, stop thinking for just a minute. He was dramatic. Stop thinking for just a minute, which gave me time to stop thinking for just a minute. And he said, now where's your problem? So let's, if nothing else, we could put that over the door. Stop thinking for just a minute. Come on in. Stop thinking. Maybe the problem that you think you have will disappear in that minute. And you'll be a new person. Next spring, we're going to have a man come from England. He's come here several times. I always tend to forget his name, but he teaches, and it really kind of fits because he teaches something called the headless way. So without your head, you're less identity. And the way it works is like this. And when I tell people this and they aren't actually trying it, they look at me like, and I do my best not to get frustrated. But so don't do that, please. Here's what his practice is. It's very odd and simple at the same time. Notice that you can see all of your body. You can see your hands, your feet, etc. You can see right to about here. Some people can see their nose, but you cannot see your head. And what he's asked you to do is use direct experience rather than what you think you know. Just the direct experience of this very moment. Can you see your head? And everybody who's honest says, no, I can't. Well, maybe I see my nose or maybe the edge of this, but I can't see my head. And since we identify with our head so much, when you look out and you realize that your head is not there, but that you are seeing anyway, even without a head, that seeing is going on, you have now entered the headless state in which when you get this little twist, you can see without a head. Direct experience, right? And that's the headless way, and what that is inviting you to have the experience that your identity is not really who you are consciousness itself, the one presence itself, having an experience. It is having the experience of seeing without the individual seeing. It is seeing itself, seeing, just seeing. And part of that is to shake us out of this addiction to the separateness of who we think we are. And to have a direct experience of what it would be like when you wake up to the fact that you are consciousness and not a body, not an individual, but you're part of the one presence, the one power. On one level, you are still an individual, but on another level, you are experiencing what it's like to be that one presence that sees it all without actually having a physical presence. Are you with me on this? I know it's weird, but I recommend when he comes to try he has a lot more techniques than me talking for 2 minutes. But this practice of coming into that awareness, it's falling beyond your conditioned mind into direct experience so that you can go, oh, I've always thought it was like this, but now I see it's also like this. Well worth the effort. Somewhere along the line, when Jesus was a boy, growing into a man, he had the headless experience, or something like it, where he went, oh, I and the Father, the one presence, one power, are one. Oh, I get it. I and the Father are one. Oh, so if I and the Father are one, I should love my neighbor as myself, because so he or she is me. Oh, I see. Love your enemies. Yeah, that's right. Love your enemies, because when you do that, you set the conditions for them to have a different experience. I see. They actually are not my enemies. They're just the other side of me in this moment. Huh, how about that? It's better to give than to receive. Wow, I get it. I don't even have to be told. Now I get it. I have the experience of being one with the Father. Therefore, that makes absolute perfect sense, because the Father is mostly about giving anyway. What is it? What does the Father need? Nada. Nothing. Death. What could death do to me? What could torture do to me that I would leave this space? I'm going to hang in here no matter what I see, and so they can do whatever they want, but I forgive them anyway, because they don't know what I know. Go to the place as often as you can, if only like you're faking it. To go to the place where you go, oh, it's only one of us here. There's only one presence and one power. That phrase, there's only one presence, one power in my life and in the universe, God the good, is the only phrase you need to know to understand unity and all the philosophy that comes out of it. And if you unpack that phrase to the depth of Charles Fillmore anyway, you wouldn't need to read Charles Fillmore, Emerson or Thoreau or any of them. You would know from your own experience, oh, I get all their writings. I don't need to be even read anymore. I just know. You're setting yourself up to investigate your own life and the life that shines through you at a level at which all that makes sense, and it's not an effort because you go, I get it. That is me. And so to practice, to come here and to practice at least 1 hour a week where you go, I'm going to hold that attitude, that space, that I'm going to hold that for everybody I see. I'm going to hold that for them because when I do it, I'm going to be conditioning myself to have a different experience, and that different experience is going to be way better than what I was having before. And an invitation to every being in my presence to have that experience. And it is so rare for people to do it that you know, it's been a couple of 1,000 years since we've had a guy named Jesus around, and we're still talking about him. Still trying to unpack what he was talking about. Think of what he did. The story goes, he's asleep in the back of a boat when there's a terrible storm. And if any of you have been in a relatively small boat in a big storm, it's tough to sleep. But they go, hey, Jesus, wake up. This is dangerous. He goes, peace be still. And the weather calms. Not because he was an individual, but because he was one with the one. And when you're there, you can speak it, and so it is. So it's not too much to ask, I hope, for all of us, that we remember as often as we can, let us make this a sacred space. And one of the things that will happen is if you practice here, it is also, you'll be reinforced, but it's also possible that you go into a room and you walk into the room and the place goes, let's calm down. Because you're there. Because you remember, others begin to remember as well. Because you're at peace and you're at love, they will feel it also. And when that happens, then you become a peacemaker. Just by your presence. So let's practice. Let's continue to practice being the presence. Let's do it now. Okay.